I'm Olivia Bramwell, 46, a U.S. Navy captain about to be pinned to Rear Admiral at the United States Naval Academy in the same hall where my father's name is carved into the wall. For 28 years, I had done the work quietly, but when a Marine captain gripped my elbow at the back of Memorial Hall and tried to walk me out of my own promotion ceremony in front of my mother, I made a choice in the days that followed that changed everything. Have you ever been treated like you didn't belong in a room you had earned the right to stand in? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand quietly in a room that was about to decide for itself who you really were, hit that like button and subscribe. It was the autumn of 1986, and I was 6 years old, walking through Bancroft Hall on the second deck with my mother's hand wrapped around mine. The Naval Academy was the only world I had any memory of. My father, a Navy lieutenant commander at the time, had been a company officer to the Brigade of Midshipmen for almost 2 years by then, and we lived in the officer housing near Hospital Point, a short walk from the seawall and shorter still from the wide stone steps of Bancroft. My mother walked me down to the yard most afternoons. She had a habit of cutting through Bancroft on the way back from the seawall, and a habit, on the days she felt the weather had been generous to us, of stopping inside Memorial Hall for a few quiet minutes before the walk home. That particular afternoon was gray and a little cold, the kind of October light that turns the brick of the yard the color of weak tea. My mother led me up the wide marble stairs to the second deck and into the high vaulted space of Memorial Hall. The names of the Academy's fallen were carved into the walls and into the stone tablets at the front of the room, names from every war the Navy had fought in. I was too young to read most of them. I could read my name and my father's name, and I knew that my name was on no wall yet because I was still a child, and that my father's name was on no wall because he was still alive and out at sea 4 months of the year. My mother walked us up the central aisle and stopped about halfway, near the wall on the left side. She read 3 of the names quietly, one after the other, and told me what each man had done. I did not understand most of what she said. I understood the silence. I understood that the silence in Memorial Hall was different from the silence in the kitchen at home, and different from the silence in the wardroom at the officers' club where my father took us for dinner on the 3rd Friday of every month. The silence in Memorial Hall was a silence that the building had decided on. A long time before I had been born, the building had decided that no one would raise their voice in this room. My mother turned to me after the 3rd name and crouched down so we were the same height. Her face was very serious. She said, "These were Edward's friends, Olivia. Some of them. The ones who didn't get to come home." I looked up at the wall. I did not know what to do with the sentence. I did not know what the right answer was. I nodded, because nodding seemed to be a thing my mother was waiting for me to do, and then I asked her, in the careful voice a 6-year-old uses for serious questions, whether my father would ever be a name on this wall. My mother did not answer right away. She straightened up. She put her hand on the back of my head, the way she always did when she did not want me to see her face. She said, "Not if I have anything to say about it, sweetheart." She said it without smiling. She said it the way a woman says a thing she has been saying to herself for years. We left Memorial Hall a few minutes later. The walk back across the yard to the housing was quiet. My mother did not bring it up again that day, or the next day, or in any of the years that followed. But she had given me a piece of vocabulary that afternoon, and I have used it for 40 years. She had taught me, without saying it in so many words, that there were rooms in the world that had been built specifically to hold what you could not say out loud. That if you needed to be silent about a thing, the architecture would meet you halfway. That if a building had been built to hold the names of men who had not come home, then the building knew, before you did, what to do with the part of you that was afraid. My father came home from a deployment that December. He had been at sea for 4 months on a Spruance-class destroyer out of Norfolk, where he had served as the operations officer. He came in through the front door of our quarters at the Academy at 2000 hours on a Friday night in his service dress blues, the same blues he wore for every homecoming. He smelled like the inside of a wardroom, which is to say he smelled like coffee and metal and the particular dry warmth of a ship's environmental system that had been on for 120 days without stopping. He set his cover on the bench by the door. He picked me up. He held me for a long time without saying anything. My mother stood in the doorway from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel, watching. She did not say anything either. She watched my father hold me. She watched him set me down. She watched him take 3 slow steps across the entryway to her, and she watched him put his hands on her shoulders, icing his forehead on her forehead. And they stayed that way for what felt like a very long time. Then they kissed once, the way 2 people who have done a thing many times kiss. I learned that night, without anyone telling me, that the work my father did and the homecoming he had were 2 parts of the same sentence. The work meant nothing if there was nobody to come back to. The homecoming meant nothing if there had been no work to come back from. The sentence held them together, and the sentence was the family. I did not have words for that observation at 6 years old. I have those words now. In the summer of 1991, when I was 11, my father had been selected for command of his first ship. The ship was a Spruance-class destroyer based out of Norfolk. The family had been preparing to move for most of the spring. The boxes were packed. The quarters at the academy had been turned over to the next family. The movers were scheduled for the first week of August. We had one last Sunday in Annapolis, and my father wanted to walk with me along the seawall by the Severn River. The weather that Sunday was warm and slightly humid. The river had the green-brown color it always had in July, and the YPs were out, the small training boats with midshipmen at the wheels, learning to handle a vessel for the first time. My father and I walked side by side along the seawall, slowly, his hands in the pockets of his khaki shorts and mine in the pockets of mine. He was 38 years old that summer. I was 11. He was about to put on the 4 shoulder boards of a Navy captain 4 years later, and he did not yet know it. He was also about to take command of his first ship 3 weeks later, and he had known about that for months. He told me, as we walked, about the wardroom on the new destroyer. He told me about the chiefs. He told me about the way a ship's first lieutenant had to know every passageway by feel, in the dark, with the lights out, because there would be a moment one day when knowing the passageways would matter more than anything else he had ever learned. He told me about the rhythm of an underway day. He told me, in the way he had of saying serious things while he watched the water, and not while he watched you, that he believed I was going to wear the uniform too. He said, "There's a particular kind of woman who belongs at sea, Liv. You'll meet her in yourself someday. Don't be afraid of her." I did not answer. I did not need to. He did not ask me to answer. He kept walking. The midshipmen on the YPs were laughing about something. A pelican landed on one of the pilings out by the buoy and folded its wings the way they fold. My father looked at the pelican and looked back at the water. I walked beside him and tried to understand what he had said, and I am not sure I have stopped trying to understand what he had said since that afternoon. I have a particular kind of woman in me now. I have met her. She does belong at sea. My father had been right about her, the way he had been right about a great many things, and he had said it on a Sunday in July in 1991, on the seawall, with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the river. He had said it once. He had not said it again. He had not needed to. In December of 1995, I was 15 years old, and my father had just been promoted to captain. The pinning ceremony had been the previous week at the Norfolk Naval Station, with my mother in the front row and me beside her and my mother's hand in mine the whole time. My father had stood on the small stage in his service dress blues, in front of the captain who had been his mentor and was now an admiral, and the new 4 shoulder boards had been placed on his uniform by my mother and by his oldest friend in the Navy, a captain named John, who is now also dead, but was alive that day. The shoulder boards were framed by the second week of December. My mother had taken them to a frame shop on Granby Street. They hung in our front hall, above the bench where my father always left his cover. That December was the last full week we had with him before he flew back to Norfolk to take command of an Arleigh Burke destroyer in the second quarter of the new year. He was home for 10 days. He cooked, he ran, he drove me to school, he made coffee in the kitchen in the morning and read the paper at the table in his old blue Navy sweatshirt and his PT shorts. He listened to me complain about chemistry. He did not push. On the second to last evening, when I was at the kitchen table doing my chemistry homework and he was at the counter rinsing the coffee carafe, he asked me, very quietly, whether I had thought about Annapolis. I looked up from the homework. I told him I thought about it every day. He nodded. He did not say anything for a while. Then he said, looking at the carafe and not at me, "I won't tell you to apply, Liv. I'll tell you to ask yourself a question. If the answer is yes, the answer was already yes." I went back to the chemistry. He went back to the carafe. Neither of us spoke about it for another hour. He did not bring it up again the rest of the week. He did not bring it up the next time he came home either. He had said the sentence once. The sentence had been the thing he had wanted to give me. He had given it to me, and he had trusted me to do the rest. In the summer of 1997, when I was 17, my mother and I drove up to Annapolis from Norfolk on a weekend in late July to walk the yard. My father was at sea. The application packet was sitting on the kitchen table at home. My mother and I had not talked about it in any direct way, but she had bought us train tickets for the trip the previous month and had said only that she thought it was time we went and looked at the place. We took the car instead of the train because my mother liked the drive. We listened to the radio. We did not talk about what we were going to look at when we got there. We had lunch at a crab house on the harbor, the same crab house my parents had been going to since the year they were married, and afterwards, we walked through the yard in the afternoon sun. We walked past Bancroft Hall. We walked past the Hospital Point quarters where we had lived. We walked past the seawall. The yard had not changed. The brick was the same. The light was the same. My mother walked next to me, slightly behind, and she did not say anything for a long time. We stopped in front of Bancroft on the way back to the car. The wide doors of the hall were open. A small group of plebs ran out into the afternoon sun. They were in their summer whites. They were running double time, because there was no other speed plebes were allowed to move at in the summer, and they disappeared around the side of the building. My mother said, very quietly behind me, "I have been waiting for this for 11 years. I did not ask her what she meant. I knew what she meant. She had been waiting for this since the October afternoon in Memorial Hall, when she had told me that the names on the wall were Edward's friends. She had been waiting for me to walk through those doors as a plebe. She had not said it before. She had said it then. She had said it once. I applied that fall. I received my appointment in the spring of 1998. I had been planning, for almost a year, to walk through the doors of Bancroft Hall as a plebe in the last week of June. I had been planning to do it with my father, standing on the lawn outside in his service dress whites, watching me walk in. That is not what happened. My father was killed in January of 1998. He was in command of an Arleigh Burke destroyer in the North Atlantic on a winter exercise when an engineering fire took the ship offline. The fire was contained within 90 minutes. The ship survived. 4 sailors did not survive. My father was one of them. He was 50 years old. He had been a Navy captain for 2 years and 2 months. I reported to plebe summer at the U.S. Naval Academy 3 weeks after his funeral. I did not tell anyone. My mother put me on the bus. She did not say goodbye. She put her hand on my cheek and she said the same sentence she had said to me when I was 6 in Memorial Hall, looking up at the wall. She said, "Not if I have anything to say about it, sweetheart." She had taken the sentence she had used about my father 12 years earlier, and she had handed it back to me. I have carried it for 28 years. I am carrying it still. In the first week of plebe summer, a Marine Corps captain who was assigned as a company officer to my plebe company called me into his office. He had read the news. He had decided on my behalf that grief and plebe summer were not compatible. He sat me down in the wooden chair across the wooden desk and he asked me, with the kind of voice a man uses when he believes he is being kind, whether I was sure I was in the right place. He said, "Bramwell, if you need to step away, if this is too soon, you have options." I had been at Annapolis for 6 days at that point. I had run 3 miles before breakfast every one of those 6 days. I had eaten 3 meals at attention. I had been screamed at by upper-class midshipmen for the 8 waking hours in between. I had not cried. I had not slept more than 4 hours in any night. I had a number of other things I would have liked to be doing. None of them included sitting in a wooden chair across a wooden desk while a man who had not been in my house when the chaplain knocked on the door in January told me very kindly that I had options. I told him, with the level of composure I had not yet learned was going to be my entire professional vocabulary, "Sir, I have one option, the same option my father had. Permission to return to my squad." He let me go. He did not believe me. He did not need to. I thought, at 18, that he had been being kind. I think now that he probably was. But kindness that does not take you seriously is its own kind of dismissal. I learned that at 18. I have never been able to unlearn it. The Marine captain at the back of Memorial Hall 28 years later was the same man I had met in the wooden chair in the summer of 1998. He was a different man, with a different face and a different name, but he was the same man. The Navy had been making him for a long time, and the Marines had not been preventing it. The first ship I served on was the USS Stout, an Arleigh Burke destroyer. I was an ensign. The year was 2003. We were in the Eastern Mediterranean, running the kind of presence operations the Navy ran in the early years of the Iraq War. I had reported aboard the previous summer. I had been assigned as the damage control assistant. The senior chief on my division, a man named Senior Chief Wallace, who had been in the Navy for 28 years, took me aside the first week of my first inspection cycle and asked me, with great courtesy, whether I would mind staying out of the engineering plant during the actual inspection. He said, "Ma'am, I would not want you to embarrass yourself." I told him, with the same composure I had used in the company officer's office at the academy, that I would be in the plant for the inspection and that I would appreciate his expertise on the deck plates with me. He raised one eyebrow. He did not say anything else. We passed the inspection. 3 months later, he requested mast for one of his sailors, and I sat the captain's mast as the recording officer. Senior Chief Wallace did not say a word to me about the engineering plant ever again. 12 years later, when I took command of my own destroyer, he sent me a Christmas card. He had retired by then to South Carolina, and the Christmas card had a small reindeer on it and a note in his handwriting that said, "Ma'am, you were going to be a captain the day you walked into my plant. Sorry it took me a week to figure that out. The card is in a frame in my Pentagon office. It is going with me to Yokosuka in the summer." I was at Department Head School in Newport, Rhode Island, in the spring of 2006. I was 26 years old. The class had 38 officers in it. 6 of us were women. At the welcome reception, a lieutenant commander I had not met before walked up to me with a glass of white wine and a great deal of cheerfulness, and he asked me which one of the students I was married to. I told him I was not married to a student. He laughed. He laughed in the way men of a certain vintage laugh, when they have decided that the woman in front of them has not understood the question. He asked me the question again, more slowly. He said, "No, I mean, which of the students is your husband? You look so young." I told him, more slowly than he had asked. "I am one of the students, sir. I look exactly like one. The Navy has been making us for 40 years. He blushed. He apologized. He retreated. I watched him cross the room, white wine still in his hand, to another woman in the class, and I watched him ask her the same question. She gave him a different version of the same answer. He apologized to her also. He stayed at the reception for another 45 minutes and asked 4 more women the same question. I'm not exaggerating. I counted. That sort of thing happened on every ship I served on and in every office I worked in for the first decade of my career. It happened in the engineering plant on the Stout. It happened at Department Head School. It happened on a destroyer in the northern Persian Gulf in 2009, when a visiting Commodore came aboard for an underway brief and addressed the room as "Gentlemen." He did it twice. The CO of the ship, a commander I trusted with my life, corrected him quietly between the second and third slide. The Commodore looked at me. He said, "Oh," he said, "my apologies, Lieutenant." He continued the brief. He used "gentlemen" again on the next slide. I gave my portion of the brief without flinching. I was recommended for early promotion on the fitness report from that tour. There are men who learn. There are men who do not. The lieutenant commander at Department Head School did not learn. The visiting Commodore in the Gulf did not learn. Senior Chief Wallace did learn. The Marine captain in the company officer's office at Annapolis did not learn. They each had their reasons. I do not pretend to know what their reasons were. I know what the outcome was. The outcome was that the Navy I worked in for the first decade of my career was a Navy that assumed in any given room that I was not the most senior officer in it. The Navy I worked in for the second decade of my career was a Navy that assumed I was. The transition between the first and the second decade was not announced. It was not celebrated. It was not even, when it happened, particularly visible. It just happened. It happened the way the tide turns. You do not see it turn. You see it after it has turned. You see one morning that the water is going out instead of coming in, and you understand that it has been going out for a while, and you have not been paying attention. As if you wait for the room to stop calling you gentlemen, you will wait forever. You give the brief anyway. The brief is the point. The room learns by watching the brief land. The morning of the pinning was a Saturday in May of 2026. The weather was warm. The yard at the Naval Academy was full of midshipmen in their summer whites. The river had the color the river has in May, which is the color of green tea with milk in it. I had driven up from Arlington at 0600 hours and parked behind the officers' club and walked the half-mile across the yard in civilian clothes, with my service dress blues on a hanger in a garment bag over my shoulder. I changed in a small dressing room behind Memorial Hall. I put on the blues. I pinned the 2 silver Navy Captain Eagles to the shoulder boards. I straightened the rows of ribbons. I checked the cover one last time and set it under my arm. I walked up the marble stairs to the second deck. My mother was already in her seat in the second row. She had arrived an hour earlier with Captain Sienna Vargo, my closest friend in the Navy, who had driven up with her from Norfolk in Sienna's car. My mother was 74 years old that morning. She had not been back to the Naval Academy since my graduation in 2002. She had not been back to Memorial Hall since the afternoon in 1986, when she had read the names off the wall to me. She had been waiting for this morning, I am telling you, for 40 years. I knew it. She knew I knew it. We had not talked about it on the phone. We had not needed to. I spent the first 10 minutes of my time in the hall at the back, on the left side of the room, with my hand resting on the wooden frame beneath the plaque that carries my father's name. I have been telling people for 28 years that there is a plaque on the wall of Memorial Hall that carries my father's name. I have been telling them that I have stood under it on every important day of my life. I had stood under it the morning of my commissioning, in white, over white, 23 years earlier. I had stood under it the morning I had taken command of my first ship in 2017. I had stood under it the morning I had taken command of the destroyer squadron in 2021. I stood under it that morning in May of 2026, with the silver Captain Eagles on my shoulder boards, and I told him, without saying it out loud, that I had taken the next one. I did not say anything more than that. I did not need to. The hall was filling. The chairs were seated. Captain Owen Rutherford, the Master of Ceremonies, was at the front of the room, in service dress blues, with the Master of Ceremonies aiguillette over his right shoulder, going over the order of march one more time with the honor cordon. Admiral Donovan Cruz, the Chief of Naval Operations, was in the side room behind the dais, drinking coffee with the Naval Academy Superintendent. The pinning box was on a small table at the center of the dais, with the new shoulder boards and the single silver star of a Rear Admiral, lower half, folded inside it. 80 officers were in the room. Half of them were flag rank or flag selectee. The other half were the friends and family and senior peers I had chosen. At about 0940 hours, 20 minutes before the ceremony began, I was standing alone at the back of the hall, just inside a roped-off section the protocol staff had set up to separate the family seating from the receiving line. I was alone because I had wanted 10 minutes to look at the room before it started. I was alone because I had wanted to stand under my father's name one more time. I was composed. I was wearing the same expression I had worn at every promotion board of my career, which is to say I was wearing very little expression at all. I did not see Captain Holden Pace approach. I heard him. He was wearing service dress, blue alphas, the Marine Corps' equivalent of my own service dress blues, and the heels of his low quarters made a particular sound on the parquet floor. The sound stopped about 3 feet behind me. There was a pause. Then he spoke. He said, "Ma'am, this section is restricted. Let me escort you out." I turned my head slightly. I looked at him. He was 30 years old. He had a company officer's gold rope on his shoulder. He had the protocol officer's clipboard under his left arm. He was clean-cut in the way young Marine officers are clean-cut. He was not looking at my face. He was looking at the space my face was occupying. I told him very quietly that I was in the correct section. He did not look at my face. He said, "Ma'am, I'm asking you again. Let me escort you out." I have thought about that sentence many times in the months since the morning of the pinning. I have thought about the man's voice, the tone of it, the particular flat politeness it carried. I have thought about the way he was holding the clipboard. I have thought about the gold rope on his shoulder. I have thought about the fact that he had been on protocol duty at the Naval Academy for 14 months at that point and had escorted, by his own later accounting, 20 wandering family members out of restricted sections of various ceremonies. I have thought about the fact that he believed in that moment that I was the 21st. He believed it. He had decided it the moment he saw me. He had decided it before he opened his mouth. The eagle boards on my shoulders were 6 inches from his face. He had not registered them. He had not looked at them. He had not needed to. He had already decided. I did not say anything more. I did not need to. He put his right hand on my left elbow. He did not grip it hard. He gripped it the way you grip the elbow of a woman you are intending to walk out of a room, the way a man grips the elbow of a woman when he believes he is being firm and polite at the same time, the way a man grips the elbow of a woman when the room around him has not yet given him the information he is missing. I did not resist. I did not pull away. I turned my head and looked at him with what an after-action report would later describe as open curiosity. He still did not look at my face. He began to walk. I let him walk me 3 steps. In the second row, my mother saw what was happening. She started to stand. Captain Vargo, beside her, put a hand on my mother's arm, and she said, very quietly, "Wait, Eleanor." My mother sat back down. She held onto the seat in front of her with both hands. Across the hall, Admiral Cruz had stepped to the dais. He was holding the pinning box in his left hand. He saw what was happening at the back of the hall. He paused, mid-sentence, in whatever he had been saying to the superintendent, and he looked at Captain Rutherford. Captain Rutherford had already seen it. Captain Rutherford stepped to the microphone. Captain Pace, behind me, said, "Ma'am, now!" Captain Rutherford's voice came through the speakers a half-second later, and his voice was the voice he used for the most formal portions of a Navy ceremony, which is a voice that does not raise itself, but does not need to. He said, "Attention to citation. Captain Olivia Lynn Bramwell, United States Navy, having been nominated by the President for promotion to the grade of Rear Admiral, lower half, in the United States Navy." Captain Pass's hand dropped. I have replayed that half-second a number of times since the morning of the pinning. I have replayed it in the way you replay things you cannot quite believe you watched in real time. Captain Pace's hand dropped. He took a half-step back. He looked, for the first time in the entire encounter, at my shoulder boards. He saw the 2 silver Navy Captain Eagles. He saw the rows of ribbons. He saw, on the breast of my service dress blues, the Surface Warfare Officer pin. He registered the citation, continuing through the speakers. He did not speak. He did not need to. He had said everything he was going to say. The room rose. Every officer in Memorial Hall came to attention. The flag officers, both Navy and Marine and Air Force, came up first. The senior captains followed. The senior NCOs in the back of the room, the honor cordon, the midshipmen, came up last. By the time Rutherford had finished the second sentence of the citation, the entire hall was on its feet. My mother was on her feet, her hand at her mouth, weeping the silent way she had wept in 1998 at the funeral. Captain Vargo was on her feet, eyes on me, the small private smile she had been holding for 23 years, finally on her face. Admiral Cruz was at attention at the dais, the single silver star in his right hand, the pinning box open beside him. I turned to Captain Pace, fully, for the first time. I looked at him. I let him look at me. I did not say anything. I did not need to. The hall had said everything I was going to say. He took another half step back. The protocol clipboard fell out from under his arm and hit the parquet floor. He did not bend to pick it up. He could not. He stood at attention with his hand at his side and his face the color of paper. I walked past him. I walked up the central aisle of Memorial Hall under the plaque that carries my father's name, in front of 80 officers standing at attention, with the morning sun coming in through the windows on the east side of the hall, and I stopped in front of Admiral Cruz at the dais. He pinned the single silver star on my collar. He pinned the second silver star on the other side. He stepped back. He saluted. I returned the salute. He said, "Admiral Bramwell, congratulations. Your father would have been very proud." I turned to my mother in the second row. She was on her feet, both hands at her mouth now, weeping silently. I saluted her first. I saluted my mother before I saluted anyone else in the hall. She put her right hand down from her mouth, and she returned the salute, the way she had taught herself to return a salute in the years she had spent on Navy piers with my father. And she nodded once, the small, careful nod of a woman who had been waiting for 40 years to nod at her daughter that way. The reception was in the Beau Coppage room at Alumni Hall, 40 minutes after the pinning. I stood in the receiving line with Admiral Cruz on my left and my mother 2 paces behind. The line was long. Every officer in the hall came through it. Every officer in the hall said congratulations. Every officer in the hall meant it. About halfway through the receiving line, Captain Holden Pace appeared in front of me in his service dress, blue alphas, the protocol aiguillette gone from his shoulder, his face the same color of paper it had been at the back of Memorial Hall. He came to attention. He saluted. I returned the salute. He began an apology. He said, "Admiral, I want to formally apologize. I was assigned protocol duty. I was not briefed on the identity of the pinay. There is no excuse. I am profoundly sorry, ma'am." I listened to him finish. I did not interrupt. I did not respond. When he was done speaking, I nodded once and looked past him at the next officer in the receiving line. Captain Pace, dismissed by the silence, stepped out of the line. He walked across the room. He walked out of the room. He did not come back. Captain Vargo drove the 3 of us back to the Marriott on Pleasant Street at 1400 hours. My mother was in the back seat. She had not said much since the receiving line. The exhaustion of the morning had settled in. I was in the front passenger seat. Sienna drove the first 10 minutes in silence. The harbor was on the right side of us. The midshipmen were out on the YPs. The sky was clear. She said without looking over, "Liv, the man put his hand on you, in Memorial Hall, in front of your mother." I said, "Sienna, I'm not going to file a complaint. That's the easy thing. I'm going to do the harder thing." She said, "What's the harder thing?" I said, "I'm going to read his record." She drove for another minute without saying anything. She knew what I meant. She had been at the Pentagon for 2 of the previous 5 years, and she knew what a flag officer's signature meant on a request for a personnel file. She knew what the file would say. She knew what I would do with what the file said. She nodded once. She did not argue. She had stopped arguing with me about the things I did with personnel files in 2017, after watching what I had done with the file of a first lieutenant on my destroyer who had needed to be moved off the bridge. Watch, Bill. She had agreed with the action then. She would agree with the action now. She said, "Liv, just promise me one thing. Promise me you'll read it slow." I said, "I always read them slow, Sienna." She said, "I know, I'm reminding you." I said, "Thank you." We pulled into the Marriott at 14:15 hours. Sienna helped my mother to her room on the 4th floor. I sat at the small desk in my own room for 10 minutes with the lights off. I did not call the Pentagon. I did not call the Naval Academy. I called my mother's room and told her I would be up in 20 minutes with sandwiches. I went down to the lobby and bought sandwiches. I took them upstairs. We ate them sitting on the bed in her room, in our service dress blues, with the curtains open and the harbor below. My mother asked me, halfway through the sandwich, the question I had been waiting for since the moment Captain Pace's hand had dropped. She said, "Did your father know, Olivia? Did he know you'd be this?" I set the sandwich down. I knelt next to her armchair, by the window. I told her, very quietly, that he had known since I was 11 years old. She cried for a long time without making any sound. I stayed kneeling next to her, with my hand on the back of her hand until she was finished. She did not say anything else for an hour. She did not need to. I went back to Memorial Hall alone at 2100 hours. The hall was empty. The honor cordon had gone. The lights were down. The Naval Academy duty officer at the door recognized me, came to attention, and stepped aside without saying anything. I walked up the central aisle. I stopped under my father's plaque. I stood at attention for a slow count of 10, the new silver star on my collar. I did not speak. I did not need to. I walked back out at 2112 hours. The duty officer was still at attention. I returned his salute. I walked across the dark yard to the Marriott, and I went up to the 4th floor, and I looked at my mother's window from the parking lot, and the light was on, and I knew she was awake, and I went up to her room and sat with her until she fell asleep at 2200 hours. I went back to the Pentagon on Monday morning at 0700 hours. The flag officer parking space had been reassigned over the weekend, and my new placard, with the single silver star, was on the windshield of the car when I arrived. I walked into the J3 corridor. My flag aide, a Marine Corps major named Hadley Cresswell, met me at the door of my office. She had taken the new shoulder boards out of the box on Friday afternoon and laid them on the credenza behind my desk. The framed photograph of my father on the bridge wing of his first ship was on the credenza too, where it had been for 2 years. At 08:15 hours, the secure phone on my desk rang. Major Cresswell knocked on the doorframe and told me Vice Admiral Patricia Lansing, the commandant of the Naval Academy, was on the line. I thanked her and picked up the phone. Patricia and I had been Naval Academy classmates. She had been the 4th person to call me on the morning of the pinning. She had been the 3rd person, after my mother and my father in 1998, to call me on the morning of every promotion I had ever received. She said, "Admiral Bramwell, the Naval Academy is sorry. I'm sorry. What would you like to see happen with Captain Pace?" I said, "Patricia, I'd like to see his personnel file." The file was on my desk by 10:15 hours. I read it twice. I read it the way I had read every personnel file I had ever signed an action on, which is slowly. Captain Holden Pace, 30 years old, U.S. Naval Academy class of 2018, commissioned Marine Corps, infantry. 1 operational tour, a battalion staff billet, no command. 2 flagged comments in the most recent fitness report from the Naval Academy Commandant. The first flag read, "Interpersonal challenges with senior women officers." The second flag read, "Tendency toward unsolicited intervention." I closed the file. I picked up the secure phone. I said, "Patricia, I read it. He's a problem. He was a problem before Saturday, and he'll be a problem after Saturday. He doesn't belong in a company officer role." "Move him," she said. "Out of the academy?" I said. "Out of the brigade. Send him somewhere a senior NCO can run him until he learns or he leaves." Captain Pace's reassignment orders arrived at the Naval Academy on Tuesday morning. He was at his new billet at Marine Corps Base Quantico, under a salty sergeant major named Roan Vickery, by Friday afternoon. He had lost the company officer rope. He had lost his promotion next look for major. He had not been released from active duty. He had not been celebrated. He would work. A sergeant major would watch him work. Either he would learn or he would leave on his own time. The Navy and the Marine Corps had no further interest in deciding which. I called my mother in Norfolk on Monday, a week after the pinning, at 07:45 hours, before I went into the office. I told her very quietly that the situation with Captain Pace had been resolved. I told her how. She listened without interrupting. She asked me one question. She said, "Olivia, are you at peace with it?" I said, "Yes, Mom." She said, "Your father would have done it the same way." I said, "I know, Mom. That's why I did it." The summer of 2026 went by quickly. The Pentagon, in the way the Pentagon does, gave me an additional duty as the Vice Chief's deputy for surface readiness. I ran a 30-person staff. I briefed the Vice Chief twice a week. I lived in my office. My mother, in Norfolk, finished a course of cardiac rehabilitation and got stronger. The two of us spoke by phone every Sunday morning at 0900 hours. I told her every Sunday what I had done in the week. She listened. She did not interrupt. She had been listening to Navy stories since 1975. She knew how to listen. The work itself was the easiest part of the summer. The work had been waiting for me. The Navy has a way of presenting a flag officer with the binder of problems that have been sitting on a desk somewhere for 2 years, waiting for someone with the authority and the willingness to read them. And the binder presented itself to me in the second week. I read it. I made the decisions the binder had been waiting for. I signed the actions. The actions moved through the Pentagon the way actions move when a flag officer has signed them, which is quickly. The Vice Chief told me, 3 weeks in, that I was doing the kind of work he had hoped I would do. I told him thank you and went back to the binder. The harder part of the summer was the new vocabulary of the room. I had spent 23 years walking into rooms in which people had assumed, until proven otherwise, that I was not the most senior officer present. I walked into rooms now in which people stood up before I had said a word. The first time it happened in the J3 conference room on a Tuesday morning, I did not know what to do with my face. I had not been prepared for the visible reflex of the room. I had been prepared for the reflex of the men in the room. I had not been prepared for the reflex of the women in the room, the junior officers, the civilian staff, the senior NCOs who had been at the Pentagon longer than I had been in the Navy. The reflex of the women was different from the reflex of the men. The reflex of the women had a small private weight to it. The reflex of the women was, I understood, the reflex of having waited their whole careers for someone with my pin on her collar to walk into the room. They had not known they had been waiting. I had not known I had been the one they had been waiting for. We learned it together on a Tuesday morning in the J3 conference room in front of a slide deck about destroyer maintenance. In October of 2026, I went back to Annapolis for the brigade's review of the surface community on a Friday afternoon. Patricia Lansing met me at the steps of Bancroft Hall. She told me walking up the steps that the brigade had been talking about the morning of the pinning all summer. The story had settled into a piece of unofficial Naval Academy folklore. The plebes had a name for it. They were calling it the Memorial Hall Salute. Patricia told me about it with a small smile. I told her, without smiling, Patricia, don't let them tell it like a war story. Let them tell it like a manners story. She laughed. She said she would try. That evening, in my room at the Officers' Club at the Academy, I got a phone call from Captain Sienna Vargo. She had been talking on Friday afternoon to a friend of hers, a Marine Corps lieutenant colonel at Quantico, who had been briefed by Sergeant Major Vickery on the progress of his current administrative officer. Vickery had said the captain was reading. The captain had stopped talking in meetings. The captain had not, in 7 months, raised his voice. Vickery had not decided yet whether the man was salvageable. He was leaning toward yes. I said into the phone, "Good. Tell Vickery to keep him another year." Sienna laughed. She said she would pass the message along. 3 weeks after the pinning, a letter arrived in my interoffice mail at the Pentagon. The envelope was hand-addressed. There was no return address. The handwriting was small and careful and used Marine Corps capital block letters where it mattered. The letter was from Captain Holden Pace. It was 2 pages long. I read it once. It is in the top drawer of my desk in my office. I'm going to leave it there. I did not reply. He wrote, in the letter, "Ma'am, I won't ask you to forgive me. I'm writing to tell you that I have understood what I did. I am at Quantico. I am working. I am quieter than I have ever been in my life. Thank you for the orders. I would not have arrived at this understanding on my own." I took the letter to Major Cresswell the next morning, and I asked her, professionally, what she would do with it. She read it. She read the way a major reads a letter from a junior captain, which is to say, without sympathy and with a great deal of attention. She told me, when she finished reading, that I should put it in the drawer and not reply. She said, "Ma'am, don't write him back. The silence is the curriculum. He's enrolled in the silence now." I put it in the drawer. At a reception at the Pentagon in late spring for a visiting Marine Corps 3-star, I was approached by a Marine Corps Brigadier General named Aldrich Mathers. Mathers was a friend of the Commandant of the Marine Corps and a man who had known Captain Pace's father since the late 1980s. He walked up to me with a coffee cup and said, very quietly, that the Marine Corps owed me an apology and that he was delivering it as a senior Marine and as a friend of the Pace family. I thanked him. I told him the apology had already been delivered, on paper, by Captain Pace himself. Mathers was quiet for a long second. He told me that was the best news he had heard about the Pace family in 18 months. He said, "Admiral, I served with his father. The father will hear about Saturday. I'd rather he hear it from me than from someone else." "May I have your permission?" I said, "Yes, sir. Tell him." He shook my hand. He walked away. I did not see him again that night. I stood at the reception for another 20 minutes. The visiting 3-star came through the receiving line. He congratulated me on the pin. He told me he had heard about the morning of the pinning. He did not say anything more than that. I thanked him. The Pentagon, for the Pentagon's reasons, had decided that the story of the morning would travel the way it would travel, and that the senior officers in 2 services would simply absorb what it meant and continue. I did not need the story to travel any further than that. The story was doing its work. The story would do its work whether or not I encouraged it. I went home to Arlington at 2200 hours. I changed out of the service dress blues. I sat on the couch in my apartment with the lights off and the harbor lights of the Potomac visible through the windows, and I thought, for the first time in a long time, about the bench on the seawall in 1991 and the sentence my father had said to the river. I drove up to Annapolis on a Saturday in late May, 2 weeks after the pinning, to help my mother move into a smaller apartment on Compromise Street, 2 blocks from the harbor. The movers left at 1700 hours. We walked down to the seawall together, slowly, my mother holding my elbow on the right side. I was wearing civilian clothes for the first time in a week. The light was the same light it had been on the morning of the pinning, 2 weeks earlier, which was the same light it had been on the Sunday in 1991, when my father had walked the seawall with me. We sat on a bench at the end. We watched the sailboats come in. My mother said, "Olivia, your father loved this view. He used to bring me down here when we were courting." I said, "I know, Mom." She said, "He would be so proud of you." I said, "I know, Mom." We sat on the bench for a long while. The light came down on the harbor in slow stripes. A sailboat came in. Another sailboat came in. The midshipmen on the YPs ran a turn drill on the far side of the channel, and the wakes from the YPs came in against the seawall in small slaps, the way the wakes had come in against the seawall in 1991 and in 1997 and in 2002. The seawall had not changed. The wakes had not changed. The river had not changed. My mother put her hand on my hand and squeezed once. I squeezed back. We did not need to say anything more. We walked back up Compromise Street as the lights started to go. That evening, in my hotel room at the Naval Academy Officers Club, I picked up the phone and called the senior officer who had handled my flag selection. He told me, off the record, that the case for my command of a destroyer squadron in Yokosuka, Japan, the following summer, had been formally locked in by the Chief of Naval Operations, and that the orders would be issued in the next administrative cycle. I thanked him. I hung up. I sat in the dark of the hotel room for a long minute with the phone in my lap. There is a particular feeling that comes the first time a senior officer tells you the room has decided. It is not satisfaction. It is closer to permission. The room had decided. The room had been deciding for a long time in small increments without my permission, while I was at sea and while I was in the office, and while I was reading Captain Pace's letter and while I was kneeling next to my mother in the Marriott. The room had been deciding for 40 years. The room had finished deciding on the morning of the pinning. The next Saturday, I drove back up to Annapolis. My mother had been in her new apartment for 1 week. We walked down the seawall together at 0900 hours. The midshipmen were out on the YPs. I carried a thermos of coffee for the two of us, and a small tin of the cookies my mother used to make in 1986 when I was 6. We sat on a bench at the end of the seawall. I poured 2 cups. We did not say anything for a long time. We did not need to. After a while, she pulled a small object out of the bag she had been carrying. It was my father's combination cover, the white officer's cap with the gold strap and the eagle badge. She had carried it from Norfolk in a hat box, and from the hat box into the bag that morning. She did not put it on the bench between us. She held it in her lap. She said, "Olivia, I have been waiting 28 years for the right time to give this to you. I think the right time is now." I took the cover from her. I took it with both hands, very slowly. I held it the way she had held it in her lap, which was the way she had been holding it in her hands for 28 years. I said, "Mom, I will keep it on the credenza next to the picture from the Stout." She nodded once. She put her hand on my hand on top of the cover. She did not say anything else. I told her then the full story of the moment Captain Pace's hand had been on my elbow at the back of Memorial Hall, and the moment Admiral Cruz had stepped to the dais with the single silver star. I told her how I had thought, in the half-second between Captain Pace's hand dropping and the room rising to attention, of the sentence my father had said to me on the seawall in 1991. I told her the sentence. I told her the way he had said it. I told her that he had not looked at me when he had said it. I told her that he had looked at the river. I said, "He said there's a particular kind of woman who belongs at sea. He said I would meet her in myself someday. He said not to be afraid of her." My mother listened. She did not interrupt. When I had finished, she said only one sentence. She said, "Olivia, you met her." I said, "I did, Mom. I think I did." The midshipmen on the YPs came in around 10:30 hours. The brigade out on the seawall began to disperse for the Saturday Liberty. We stood up slowly. I carried the empty thermos in my left hand and my father's cover in my right. My mother took my left arm. We walked back up Compromise Street to her apartment. On the way, she asked with a small smile when the orders for Yokosuka were going to be issued. I told her soon. She said she was going to start packing. She said, "I'm going to need a new dress. I haven't been to a change of command since 1996. I said, "Mom, you're going to need a passport." She laughed. She laughed the way she had laughed in 1996, before my father had taken his last ship. She laughed the way she had not laughed in 28 years. The laugh stayed with me on the drive back to Arlington that afternoon. It is still with me. It will be with me when she lands at Yokosuka in the summer with her new dress and her new passport and the same hat box she has carried the cover in since 1998. I want you to hear one thing, if you have not heard anything else. There are rooms in the world that have been built to hold what you can't say out loud. There are men in those rooms who will try to walk you out of them. There are mothers in those rooms who will stand up the moment they see what is happening. There are friends in those rooms who will put their hand on the mother's arm and tell her to wait. There are senior officers on the dais who will pause mid-sentence and look at the room and decide to call your name. There are rooms that rise. The rooms always rise. The room rose for me on a Saturday morning in May. It will rise for you. The work is the answer. The work was always the answer. If you have ever stood at the back of your own life while a man in a clean uniform tried to walk you out of it, I want you to know what I know. The room rises. Stand under your father's name. Take the cover. Take the orders. Wear the star. Salute your mother first. If you've ever stood in a room and felt yourself being slowly pushed out of it by someone who hadn't bothered to look at your shoulders, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Have you ever had a parent who believed in you before you believed in yourself? Has there been one quiet moment in your life that felt like an answer to a question you'd been carrying for years? And if you have somebody you would salute first, the way I saluted my mother first, tell me who they are. This one hit home. Hit subscribe.